Police officer arrests 9-year-old black girl. But what happens 10 minutes later is so surprising that no one could have imagined. What happens when fate brings together a 9-year-old girl and a police sergeant in a situation that will change their lives forever? In a neighborhood marked by challenges and injustices, Emily, a black girl full of dreams, finds herself in a moment of terror that will lead her down an unexpected path. What seems like a simple game turns into a nightmare when a misjudgment places her at the center of a criminal investigation. Thus, the lives of Emily and Sergeant Mike Harris are about to intertwine in ways they never imagined. In the heart of an American city like Chicago, in a low-income neighborhood, the streets reflect the daily struggles of its inhabitants. Emily lives with her mother, Sharon, in a small house that is a refuge of love and challenges. Although life is hard, the little girl has an indomitable spirit and dreams of being an architect, wishing to build a better future for herself and others. On a sunny day while playing in the community park, her dreams are abruptly threatened. Witnessing a suspicious exchange between two men, Emily feels a chill in her stomach and decides to run, but not before Sergeant Harris sees her and arrests her, mistaking her for a criminal. Mike Harris, a veteran police officer, carries the weight of his own experiences. He grew up in an environment similar to Emily's, but life pulled him away from his roots. At 45 years old, he finds himself caught between the need to enforce the law and the compassion he begins to feel for the scared little girl in his patrol car. The decision to arrest her seems correct at first, but the pressure of the environment and Emily's innocence begin to challenge his certainties. For him, what should be a simple police occurrence transforms into a moral dilemma. As panic sets in and reality becomes increasingly chaotic, a deafening sound of gunfire and screams echoes through the streets. Harris, realizing that Emily's life is at risk, is forced to choose between keeping her in custody or releasing her to escape the imminent dang. The climax of this decision will shape not only their destinies, but also the concepts of justice and redemption that both carry. What starts as a misjudgment reveals itself as an opportunity for transformation, where Emily's courage and Harris's search for greater meaning in life intertwine in a scenario of tension and revelations. This narrative is not just about crime and punishment, but about the internal struggle of a man who must confront his own prejudices and the innocence of a girl who, unknowingly, becomes the key to a fairer world. As events unfold, the reader is led to reflect on the complexity of life, the strength of community, and the importance of looking beyond appearances. Emily and Harris's journey will challenge their beliefs and force them to reevaluate what it truly means to be just in a world full of nuances and challenges. Emily was paralyzed, her wide, scared eyes fixed on Sergeant Harris, who was watching her with a look of confusion. She didn't understand what had happened, why he had held her so tightly as if she were a criminal. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, and amid the panic her mind began to wonder if something was really wrong with her. The voices around her became a blur as the sound of gunfire echoed in the distance, mingling with the scream of a woman who seemed to be in despair. Emily's heart was pounding, each beat resonating as a reminder that, at that moment, she was not just a child playing in the park, but a girl who had become part of something much larger and more dangerous. Sergeant Harris, for his part, was battling his own demons. He was a principled man, but the pressure of the job often pushed his convictions to the background. Looking at the little girl in front of him, Harris felt a pang of empathy, a connection that reminded him of his own childhood. He had grown up in a similar neighborhood, where the streets were filled with challenges and injustices. The weight of his gun on his hip felt heavier than ever, and the decision he needed to make tormented him. Letting her go could mean a risk, but keeping her in custody felt even more wrong. As police sirens cut through the air, Emily began to feel like a prisoner in her own life. The image of her mother, Sharon, flashed in her mind. She always said that life was full of choices and that each one shaped the future. Now, Emily found herself facing a choice she hadn't made, but that could change everything. So as the scene unfolded around her, she remembered the promise she had made to herself: never let fear paralyze her. The chaos began to intensify. Harris quickly turned, trying to assess the situation around him. He realized that there was something more at stake than a simple gunfight. Two men, one of whom was known for his illicit activities, were involved in a dispute that could put innocent lives in danger. The image of Emily, scared and confused, reminded him of the fragility of life. He needed to act. Meanwhile, Emily, feeling more and more cornered, looked around for an escape. The park that had once been a place of fun now felt like a maze of uncertainties. She didn't want to be seen as a criminal. She didn't want her mother to see her on television, a girl involved in something terrible. With a surge of determination, she decided that she could not just stand there. If life had taught her anything, it was that courage comes in many forms, and at that moment, her courage manifested in a silent resolve. Harris, realizing what was happening, felt his determination strengthen. He couldn't let Emily's innocence be destroyed by mistakes that weren't hers. The pressure inside him began to turn into action. He decided that, no matter what happened, he would protect the girl. With a swift movement, he freed her and said, "Run, Emily, go home and tell your mum what happened." Emily hesitated for a moment, but a look on Harris's face gave her courage. He wasn't just a police officer. In that instant, he seemed like a defender. She ran, her small legs crossing the park as the vision of her mother guided her. At the same time, Harris prepared to face the unfolding situation. He knew that the decision to let her go was not just an act of kindness, but a choice that could come at a high cost. The tension escalated as the gunshots began to draw closer, and he found himself immersed in a moral dilemma. As she ran, Emily remembered her mother's words about courage and responsibility. She didn't want to be just a spectator in her life story. When she arrived home, breathless and filled with fear, she found Sharon in the kitchen. The look on her mother's face, worried and distressed, made Emily feel a wave of guilt. But at the same time, she knew she needed to tell the truth, not just to her mother, but also to herself. At that moment, both Emily and Harris were at a turning point. They were each facing challenges that would test their inner strength, and the unusual connection between them began to form even from a distance. Life had placed them on a difficult path, and now each of them would have to find a way to overcome the adversities that would arise. Emily could barely breathe as she ran home. Each step took her farther from the chaos she had left behind, but also forced her to confront what had happened in the park. Her heart pounded hard, and a wave of emotions flooded her: fear, confusion, and a strange sense of guilt. Upon entering the house, the safety she sought seemed distant, as if the world outside the door had become a threatening and unfamiliar place. The scene in the kitchen was reassuring, but Sharon's expression said otherwise. Her mother was preparing dinner, but her eyes were fixed on the door, anxious for her daughter's return. As soon as Emily entered, Sharon abruptly stood up. Her maternal instincts kicked in. "Emily, what happened? Are you okay?" The concern in her mother's voice made the little girl feel a knot in her throat. I was in the park and..." The words failed her, and tears began to slide down Emily's face. Sharon stepped closer and hugged her, enveloping her daughter protectively. "Calm down, dear. Breathe. What happened?" Between sobs, Emily finally told everything, from the moment Sergeant Harris held her to the gunshots echoing in the distance. As she spoke, each word felt like an added weight on her shoulders. Sharon listened attentively, her expression shifting between relief and horror. "My God, Emily, you shouldn't have been there alone," she said, her voice trembling. "That's very dangerous." Emily felt the weight of the reprimand, but what troubled her more was the feeling that life was rapidly changing around her. She didn't want to be seen as a fragile child, but the reality was that she was scared and out of control. "I just wanted to play, Mom. Why did this have to happen?" The desperation in her voice echoed through the kitchen. Meanwhile, Harris found himself in an equally complicated situation. He was at a crossroads, having freed the girl in the hope that his choice would protect her. But what was happening around him was a true conflict. The shouts and gunfire were getting closer, and he needed to act. As a police officer, his duty was to protect, but he also knew it could be his last day. The tension in the air was palpable. The two men who had initiated the gunfight were approaching, and Harris felt he needed to do something quickly. He positioned himself behind a tree, trying to observe the situation cautiously. Bullets whizzed by, and he knew that the lives of many people were at stake, including Emily's. With each gunshot, Harris's heart raced faster. He couldn't allow the girl's innocence to be tainted by a gang war that had nothing to do with her. He was about to make a crucial decision when he saw one of the men running toward him, visibly injured but determined to escape. Harris had to act. He drew his weapon and yelled, "Stop, don't move." The man hesitated, and in that moment Harris realized it could be the opportunity he needed to resolve this without further bloodshed. He didn't want to be just another contributor to the cycle of violence. But as he tried to calm the situation, a new wave of panic hit him. The other man appeared from behind and the gunfight resumed, forcing Harris to seek cover. On the other side of town, Emily was still grappling with the reality of what she had experienced. The feeling of helplessness overwhelmed her. She wanted to be strong, to show that she wasn't afraid, but the truth was that fear paralyzed her. "Mum," she said, her voice low, "what if I had stayed there? What if something had happened to me?" Sharon looked at her, realizing that her daughter needed more than just simple comfort. "Dear, you showed courage by running home. Sometimes courage isn't about facing dangers, but about knowing when to walk away from them." Sharon's words resonated with Emily, like an echo of hope amid the storm of emotions. But life didn't stop, and as the police sirens approached, Emily knew that the city she lived in was changing. She could no longer ignore the dangers surrounding her. The connection Emily felt with Harris, even from a distance, began to transform into determination. She wanted to make a difference, not just be a victim of circumstances. Thus, while chaos unfolded outside, both Emily and Harris were on a journey of self-discovery and transformation. Each faced their own fears, their own choices, and amidst the confusion, the possibility of a different future began to take shape. What were once mere reactions were now decisions that would shape their lives forever. Emily sat at the table, the food her mother had prepared cooling beside her. Sharon's words still echoed in her mind, but the feeling of uncertainty wouldn't let her be. As she chewed on a piece of bread, she looked out the window, where the lights of the police cars flashed in the twilight. The city, which had once seemed so familiar, now appeared to be a place filled with shadows and secrets. Outside, the sirens wailed incessantly, and the air was charged with tension. Harris, while struggling to keep the situation under control, felt a wave of despair. He knew that the decision he made next could cost lives. Adrenaline pumped through his veins, but it wasn't just the instinct for survival that drove him. It was also the responsibility he felt to protect those who could not defend themselves. When he looked at the injured man before him, the words of his partner who had been hit in a previous shootout echoed in his mind. Sometimes we have to choose between what is right and what is easy. Harris had always believed that doing the right thing was the way to go, but what was right in that moment? He remembered Emily, the little girl he had saved, and it gave him a new perspective. He could not fail again. Suddenly, a distant explosion made the ground shake beneath his feet. Harris felt his heart race, and for a moment thought of Emily and how she would be coping with all of this. The image of her, crying and scared, hit him like a blow. He could not allow that scene to repeat itself. With new focus, he decided he needed to end this before more people were hurt. However, the situation was about to escalate. The injured man in front of him, in a moment of desperation, raised the weapon he still held. Harris felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that the man's life was at stake, just as much as his own and those around him. He had only a fraction of a second to decide. The adrenaline propelled him to act. He aimed his weapon, and in a firm voice shouted that he didn't want to hurt him, but if he didn't drop the gun now, he would have no choice. The man hesitated, but the tension in the air was palpable. Around them, the shouting and gunfire continued, and Harris realized he could not wait any longer. What had begun as a simple day in the park had turned into a nightmare, and he was in the middle of it. He was not just a police officer, he was a protector, and that forced him to confront his own failures. He had hesitated before, and it had almost cost a child's life. Before we continue with this thrilling story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories, and let us know which city you're watching this video from in the comments. On the other side of the city, Emily was in a whirlwind of emotions. Her mother's words made her reflect on her choices. She had always thought that courage was about facing problems head-on, but now she saw that there were moments when it was better to step back and protect oneself. That night was changing her, and she didn't want to be just a spectator in her own life. She said she wanted to make a difference with a determined voice. She wanted to help in some way. Sharon looked at her with concern, but also with pride. "Emily, you are just a child. The world is complicated, and there are dangers out there that you do not understand. But I want to understand. I can't just sit here while all of this is happening. I need to do something." The passion in Emily's voice was palpable, and at that moment she realized she could no longer hide from what was happening around her. The city was in crisis, and she could not ignore it. Emily's determination led her to think of a way to take action. She remembered a group of young people she had seen at school who gathered to discuss ways to help the community. What if she joined them? What seemed like simple fun could turn into something bigger, something that could make a difference. Meanwhile, Harris was struggling to keep the situation under control. He realized He couldn't keep acting alone. He needed support. Looking around, he saw that the police were arriving and quickly setting up a perimeter. He took a deep breath, feeling that help was arriving, but he also knew that his final decision was still to come. Everyone's life depended on it. The connection between Emily and Harris grew stronger with each moment. Both were seeking a purpose, while the fate of the city hung in the balance. Emily's courage was forming into a desire for change, while Harris fought to save lives, not only his own but also those of innocence like the girl he had found. What had seemed like an ordinary day was turning into a life lesson for both of them. They were about to discover that even in times of despair, hope and determination could shine like lights in the darkness. The future unfolding before them was uncertain, but the will to fight for a better world was beginning to blossom in their hearts. Each in their own way, Emily and Harris were ready to face whatever was to come, even if it meant confronting their own weaknesses and fears. As the tension grew around Harris, the sound of sirens and screams continued to echo. He took a deep breath, feeling the pressure rise in his chest. The decision he was about to make was not just about the immediate situation, it was about the life he had chosen to lead, about the promises made to himself and to Emily. The wounded man in front of him seemed to hesitate, the gun wavering in his hand. Harris remembered the little girl he had saved, and the responsibility he felt for her intensified. When the distant explosion sounded, the man, overtaken by panic, fired a shot. The sound burst in the air like thunder. Harris lunged to the side, feeling adrenaline rush through his veins. He thought, no, no, no. As he quickly got up, his mind focused on protecting not just himself, but also the innocents around. He couldn't let more lives be lost. With a firm voice, he repeated, "Drop the gun, this is your last chance." The man hesitated again. Harris knew this was an opportunity. He saw the fear in the man's eyes and understood that in a moment of desperation, many could become hostage to their own choices. He needed to find a way to rescue the humanity that still existed in that man. "You don't need this. We can resolve this differently," he said, trying to reach the man on a deeper level. Meanwhile, Emily was at home, sitting at the table, her mother's words still resonating in her mind. She wanted to make a difference, but how could she in a city that seemed to be crumbling? The idea of joining the group of young people excited her, but it also brought doubts to the surface. Could she really help? Could she be a voice for change amidst the chaos? Insecurity enveloped her, but determination was stronger. She decided she would take a step forward. "I need to go," she told Sharon, who looked at her with concern. "Mom, I can't just sit here doing nothing. I want to be part of the solution." Sharon hesitated, but the passion in her daughter's eyes made her realize it was futile to try to hold her back. "If you really want this, then I can't stop you, but promise me you'll be careful." "I promise, Mom," Emily replied, a glimmer of determination in her eyes. She stood up, her heart pounding as she left the house. At that moment, she felt she was stepping away from the child she was, taking the first steps toward the woman she wanted to become. Back at the confrontation, Harris saw the situation intensifying. The wounded man was about to make a choice that could change everything. Harris realized that if he wanted to avoid more violence, he would have to act quickly. With a swift movement, he approached, keeping calm. "Listen, I understand that you are scared. We all are. But this is not the way. Let's talk." The man, with tears in his eyes, looked at Harris. He seemed lost, and Harris saw a weakness that was not just physical, but emotional. "I don't want to die here," the man said, his voice trembling. Harris felt his heart tighten. He knew the right words could make a difference. "Nobody wants that. Let's find a solution together." As the tension eased, the group of police officers moved closer, ready to act. Harris felt the pressure intensifying again. He needed to maintain control, not just of the situation, but also of his own emotions. Remembering Emily helped him stay focused. He couldn't fail. Not again. The connection between the two, even in such a critical moment, was palpable. Harris was trying to save a life, but he was also fighting his own demons. The pain of losing a partner, the guilt of not having acted sooner, these haunted him. He knew he needed to confront those feelings, not just for himself, but for all those who depended on him. Emily, upon joining the group of young people, felt she was becoming part of something greater. The conversations were lively, but there was a serious understanding of what was happening in the city. She shared her concerns, and her new friends listened attentively. "What can we do? How can we help?" one of them asked, and Emily felt a wave of hope. She was surrounded by people who wanted to act just like her. With every word they spoke, Emily felt more confident. Together they began to discuss plans, from organizing a community event to getting involved in direct actions to help those in need. Their energy was contagious, and Emily realized that even being young, she could make a difference. As Harris and the wounded man approached an understanding, life continued to unfold in unexpected directions. He knew that regardless of what happened, the connection with Emily and her determination to fight for a better future were powerful forces in a world full of uncertainties. That night, both Harris and Emily understood that courage was not just about facing challenges, but also about finding hope amidst despair. Harris felt the weight of the situation around him. The wounded man, who had once seemed a threat, was now a desperate human being, just like him. The echo of the sirens still resonated in the distance, but at that moment all that mattered was the connection forming between the two. Harris realized that anger and fear could be overcome by empathy and understanding. He took a deep breath and, with a softer voice, continued, "I can help you, you're not alone." The tension began to ease, but the internal struggle within Harris was fierce. He fought against the memories of the past, the failures that haunted him, the loss of a partner, the feeling of inadequacy that accompanied him every day. But with each passing second, he realized he needed to leave those shadows behind. What he really wanted was to be a force for good, not just for himself, but for those around him. The man, now with tears in his eyes, began to lower the weapon slowly. Harris saw this as a sign. He stepped closer, feeling that by opening up to the other, he was also allowing himself to be vulnerable. "Let's get out of here together. You can find a different path." Meanwhile, Emily, on her new journey, felt that her life was changing. Conversations with the young people inspired her. She realized that she was not just a product of the chaotic environment she lived in, but that she had the power to shape her own destiny. Each idea discussed in that group made her feel stronger, more capable. The insecurity that had paralyzed her before was dissipating. She remembered her mother, the worries, and the love she felt for her, and that motivated her to take action even more. The group decided that the first initiative would be to organize a community event, a way to bring the people of the city together and create a safe space for dialogue and support. Emily was responsible for some of the tasks, and as her self-confidence grew, she realized she was becoming a leader, even if timidly. The idea that her actions could have a real impact filled her with hope. Back at the confrontation, Harris's transformation was underway. He saw himself not just as a police officer, but as a human being who had the capacity to touch the lives of others. He remembered the little girl he had saved, and the desire to protect her drove him to act more consciously and bravely. Harris realized that true success was not in avoiding crises, but in knowing how to deal with them when they arose. With the weapon now fallen to the ground, the man looked at Harris with a new understanding. I don't know what to do," he whispered, his voice now full of vulnerability. Harris saw the internal struggle reflected in his eyes and realized they were both undergoing a transformation. That's how we all feel sometimes, but the choice to change is in your hands. As the man began to accept the help that Harris offered, he realized that the act of saving someone could in fact help him to save himself as well. From that moment on, he committed to facing his own fears and seeking healing for his internal wounds. The connection he had formed with the wounded man made him understand that true overcoming comes from facing challenges with courage and compassion. Emily, for her part, was ready to apply the lessons she had learned. She began to see the value of the friendship she was building. Along with her new friends, she not only found support but also the strength she needed to keep fighting. Together, they were more than a group. They were a community, united by a common goal. That night, as Harris and the man moved away from the chaos, they both knew they had found a new beginning. Harris looked at the starry sky and felt a wave of hope. He was ready to leave the past behind and open himself up to new possibilities. And somewhere in the city, Emily was about to embark on a journey that would change not only her life but also the lives of many around her. Change was on the way, and with each step they were both becoming stronger, more capable and more human. Harris took a deep breath, smelling the metallic scent of blood mixed with the heavy air of the night. The man in front of him, now unarmed and vulnerable, seemed a reflection of Harris's own insecurities. The past haunted him, but now he had a choice. With the weapon fallen to the ground, Harris stepped even closer, determination in his gaze. He knew he needed to act, not just as a police officer, but as a human being who cared. "You don't have to do this alone," Harris said, his voice firm and calm. He extended his hand, not in a gesture of domination, but as an invitation. The man hesitated, his eyes filled with pain and confusion. Harris saw the internal struggle in his expression, and it reminded him of his own battles. He too had felt lost, not knowing whom to turn to. "I've lost people I loved," Harris continued, a thread of emotion tinting his voice. "I know what it's like to feel there's no way out, but there is a path, and I can help you find it." The man looked at the outstretched hand, and the hesitation began to dissipate. Harris saw a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. It was as if in that moment they could both feel the weight of their shared experiences. Meanwhile, the siren echoed in the distance, but for Harris, all that existed was that instant. He remembered the little girl he had saved, the hope she represented, and that pushed him even more. He needed to be that hope for the man in front of him. Each had their scars, but the connection they were forming could be the key to healing. "What do you think will happen if you continue like this?" Harris asked, trying to spark reflection in the man. "You have the chance to rewrite your story. It's not easy, I know, but you can choose a new path." The man lowered his head, and tears began to slide down his face. He seemed to be facing the internal storm that consumed him. Harris stepped even closer, now just a few steps away. "I'm here with you. Let's take the first step together." The man looked into Harris's eyes and saw something he didn't expect. Genuine empathy. He remembered his own struggles and how he had felt helpless, but in that moment, there was someone willing to extend a hand. With a hesitant movement, the man stepped forward and took Harris's hand. The instant connection was like a ray of light in the darkness. Harris felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He knew he was not just saving that man, but also saving himself. The journey of overcoming was mutual. Meanwhile, Emily was preparing for the community event she had organized. With renewed confidence, she looked at the faces of the young people around her, all eager and determined. They were there, ready to make a difference. The idea that they could transform their community into a space of support and dialogue motivated her at every moment. However, there was a shadow in Emily's heart. She remembered the difficulties her family faced and the doubts that haunted her. But, like Harris, she was determined to change her story. "Together, we are stronger," she said to the group, her words echoing the determination that was growing inside her. Back at the confrontation, the tension between Harris and the man was easing. Harris saw that the internal struggle was turning into acceptance. The man finally let the tears flow freely, and the pain he carried seemed to be dissipating. "I don't know if I deserve help," he said, his voice trembling. Harris smiled, a smile full of compassion. "We all deserve a second chance. What matters is what we do now." He realized that this conversation was not just about saving a life, but also about rediscovering one's own humanity. True strength came from the ability to connect and be vulnerable. With a simple gesture, Harris embraced the man, and this act of solidarity sealed the transformation. The man, now surrounded by a warmth he had never felt before, surrendered to the possibility of change. He finally realized he was not alone. Meanwhile, Emily and her group were ready to start the event. A new beginning lay ahead of them, and hope shone in their hearts. Together, they would become the change they wished to see in the world. The friendship built among them was the foundation for a brighter future. In that moment, both Harris and Emily knew they had found the strength to face their challenges and rewrite their stories. The journey of overcoming was not easy, but with empathy and mutual support, everything became possible. The transformation was underway, and they were ready to embrace the new. Harris stepped away from the man, still holding his hand, as if he wanted to convey the strength he had found in the connection. The man, now calmer, looked down at the ground, lost in thought. The siren still sounded in the distance, but to him, the noise seemed far away, as if the worries of the outside world didn't matter anymore at that moment. Harris knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but a first step had been taken. "Can you tell me your story?" Harris asked, his voice soft yet firm. The man hesitated, but the words began to flow. He spoke about the losses he had faced, about the loneliness that accompanied him, and about how he had reached a point where he saw no way out. Harris listened attentively, feeling that man's pain as if it were his own. He remembered what he had faced in his own life, the hardships that had shaped him. Meanwhile, Emily, at her community event, felt a wave of excitement and nervousness. She was nearing 30, but her passion for helping young people find purpose made her seem older. Looking at the illuminated faces before her, she felt fulfilled. It was a moment she had always dreamed of, and she was there, about to make a difference. "We are here not just to listen, but to act," Emily said to the group. Each of you has a story, and each story is important. If we can unite, we can create a space where everyone feels valued. Her words resonated among the young people, who began to share their own experiences. Empathy spread, and the room filled with a warmth that was not just physical, but emotional. Meanwhile, back at the place where everything had happened, Harris felt that the man beside him was beginning to open up. "I thought I was the only one, that no one cared," the man said, his voice choked. "But you stayed here. That means something." Harris smiled, knowing that his presence had made a difference. "That's what we do for each other," Harris replied. "No one needs to carry burdens alone. The journey can be lonely, but human connection is what helps us move forward." The man nodded, and for the first time, a small spark of hope lit up his gaze. After a while, Harris helped the man to his feet. "Let's seek help together. You don't have to face this alone." The man was reluctant, but Harris's determination inspired him. With a hesitant step, he agreed to go to the support clinic, where he could find more people willing to help him. As they walked, Harris couldn't help but think about the transformation he had witnessed. He himself had changed that night. He had freed himself from some of his own insecurities by helping another person face theirs. It was a cycle of healing that was starting to form, and he was eager to see how far it could go. That same night, Emily received text messages from some of the young people who had participated in the event. "Thank you, Emily. You changed my way of looking at things," said one of them. Other messages expressed gratitude and a desire to get more involved. Emily's heart filled with joy. She realized that her courage and determination not only helped her, but also inspired others to seek change in their lives. Harris and the man arrived at the clinic, and Harris felt a sense of relief upon seeing that help was available. He remembered his own challenges and how he had overcome each of them. "This is the beginning," he said to the man, who was looking around, nervous but hopeful. "You are in a safe place now." Meanwhile, Emily was preparing for more meetings with the young people. She knew that the journey was just beginning, but she was ready to face the challenges that would come. "Remember," she told the group, "each step we take together is a step toward a better future." The room echoed with applause, and the positive energy surrounded them. Harris and Emily's lives had changed forever. They both learned that true strength lies in empathy and connection. They were ready to face whatever came their way, together and supported by a community that had begun to unite. The scars of the past still existed, but now, with each new story shared, they became part of a mosaic of hope and transformation. Harris and the man, now friends, left the clinic with a new understanding of life. The weight that once felt unbearable was now lighter, shared between them. In the days that followed, Harris dedicated himself to helping the man rebuild his life. They met regularly, and each conversation seemed to bring more clarity and hope. Harris realized that by helping the other, he was also helping himself. He reflected on his achievements and how much he had grown since that fateful day. Similarly, Emily continued her work with young people. Each meeting was an opportunity to witness changes in the lives of those who listened to her. The group began to meet regularly, creating a safe space where everyone could express themselves. Emily realized that her courage in sharing her own story was inspiring those around her. She remembered how alone she felt in her challenges, and now she saw each of them coming together to face their own battles. Meanwhile, the man Harris had helped began to find his voice. He became an advocate for mental health, sharing his story at community events. His journey of pain transformed into a testimony of overcoming, and he was determined to help others facing similar challenges. Harris watched proudly as his friend became a symbol of hope for many. He felt that by supporting that man, he had contributed to something greater than himself. However, the past still haunted the man. He had an old enemy who had betrayed him, causing his downfall. He decided it was time for revenge. With Harris's help, he devised a plan. But as the process unfolded, something changed. The man realized that revenge would not bring the peace he so desperately wanted. Instead, he decided to confront his enemy in a different way, with words, not violent actions. He wanted his old rival to see the transformation that had occurred in his life. When the day of the confrontation arrived, the man was nervous but determined. Harris accompanied him, offering support. Instead of yelling or acting out in anger, the man spoke about his pain and how the betrayal had affected him. He told his enemy that, although the past was painful, he would not let it define his future. The man was surprised by the rival's reaction, who seemed genuinely remorseful. The conversation ended with an unexpected understanding, and instead of revenge, they found a path to reconciliation. Harris and the man left that meeting with a sense of relief. In that moment, both realized that true strength was not in seeking revenge, but in finding peace and moving forward. The man said goodbye to his past, ready to embrace a future full of hope and possibilities. Harris, in turn, felt that his own journey of overcoming was intertwining with his friends. The transformation of both was evident. They had learned that the scars of the past did not need to be a burden, but could become part of a new story of overcoming and friendship. Over time, their friendship deepened, and they became a source of support for one another, showing that human connection is essential in the pursuit of healing and growth. Now they were ready to inspire others to do the same. The message they wanted to share was clear. Everyone has the capacity to change and overcome. If you feel stuck in your own story, remember that you are not alone. Sharing your experiences can be the first step toward transformation. If you have also faced challenges and found strength in the connections around you, share your story in the comments. Together we can create a community of support and empathy. And don't forget, liking and subscribing to the channel helps us bring more inspiring stories like this. Your voice matters, and your action can make a difference. Let's transform pain into hope together.